Welcome back to No Limit Drag Racing 2.0. Now, in this video, I'm honestly really happy to share with y'all my own personal build and tune of the MK3 Supra. Now, there are no other tunes used in this video. There's not going to be anything linked in the description down below because, funny enough, when y'all are seeing this video, there may very well be other tunes of this car out there that are way faster than this one. But when I was building this car, there really weren't any. And so I was like, well, I'm not really a tuner, but I'll give it a try. And I really wanted to give this thing some love because the MK3 has kind of been almost shoved to the side a little bit compared to some of the other cars in the update. And I think that that's because when compared to cars like, for example, the R34 Skyline, yeah, the MK3 Supra has a following, but it's obviously nowhere near the size of the following of something like the R34 GTR. So when you get into a situation where you have a car like this, obviously there are still going to be people that are going to want this car and they're going to want to build it, but the majority of people are still going to go for something else. And so a car like this, unfortunately, ends up being sidelined. And of course, with the Datsun being as fast as it is, I think a lot of people that still enjoy rear-wheel drive are gravitating a little bit more to the Datsun than they are to the MK3 Supra because I see way less MK3 Supras online. And of course, when it comes to people posting tunes and other people asking for tunes, I see a bunch of people asking for tunes of the Datsun and I see a bunch of people posting various tunes for the Datsun, but it's very rare to see people asking for tunes of the MK3 Supra. So be warned, this setup is kind of a work in progress, but if you want to use it as a starting point and then modify it from there, feel free. And of course, as you'll see a little bit later on, my only issue with this car, at least in terms of getting it set up and tuned and built and everything, was kind of honestly controlling the weight balance. And that comes into play obviously a little bit later on. And also the gearing setup is very work in progress, but I generally, when I set up gearing myself, I tend to obviously take that graph and scale it to about 270. So I have a wide range to where I can see where the car is going to hit 239 to 242, and then I modify everything else to be as even and smooth as I can from there. And honestly, you're not going to get it perfect in the shop. You kind of have to give it a little bit of a baseline in the shop and then take it out for a test run and then another test run and then another test run. And then after you do that test run, you need to do about 5 more test runs. And then you're just going to keep modifying your gearing and modifying your gearing and dialing it in and dialing it in from run to run to run. And then eventually you'll end up with something that works. Now, the fastest pass I was able to get in this car is about a 5.7, which you'll see a little bit later. And you also saw one of those 5.7 passes in the beginning of the video as well. And for someone that doesn't really tune at all, I'm really proud of a 5.7. And I'm sure, of course, there's going to be people in the comments that are going to say things like, oh, well, I have like 10 cars in my garage that run 5.5s. So your 5.7 is basically slow and worthless. And those people show up every time I build a car. So it is what it is. And then, of course, obviously, setting up the suspension is also a work in progress. And it could be refined way, 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 way more. So don't take any of this as like the perfect setup for this car or anything that's like proven. This is mainly just me kind of messing around and figuring out what I want to go with. And then once I get it dialed into where I'm happy-ish, then I take it out to the test and tune. And that's where I start to really mess with the little things and then adjust things here and there and adjust more things here and there. Because I'll go ahead and tell y'all right now, the first test run in this car was garbage. I mean, we're talking about spinning the rear tires almost all the way down the track and not being able to hook the back of the car up at all to hooking it up fairly okay and running a 5.7. So I would say we made some pretty good progress. And while it is, of course, not a very fast car by any means, it could very well be one of the slower cars in the entire update. But even if it is one of the slower cars in the entire update, it still looks so good. And once you get the fitment really dialed on this car, it's definitely one that I'm like, oh, that looks right. You know what I mean? It just looks so fitting of the time period that it comes from. And also, I didn't really mess with the launch control all that much after this, although I may see a little bit later on if it likes launching higher than this or likes launching lower than this. So that is all, once again, a work in progress. So now you get to enjoy the messiest first run basically that I've ever had, where we spin the rears all the way down the drag strip. And it was in this moment that she knew it was time to go back to the drawing board. And I'll go ahead and tell y'all right now, the biggest issue was the wheelie bar. I had no idea what it was doing, or rather, no idea what I was doing when it came to setting up the wheelie bar. And so that took a little bit of trial and error and back and forth and figuring out what worked. And then kind of just, honestly, just like trial and error from there. The easiest way to learn how to tune is to have a trial and error process. I mean, literally, you basically have to go into it accepting the fact that, like, yup, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm going to learn by essentially having a bad run over and over and over and over again, and then breaking it down and then figuring out what made that run not as good as you wanted it, and then just going back to the drawing board again and again and again. And after this one, I knew we were starting to get somewhere, but I also knew that we really had to calm the car down. And what that essentially amounted to was adjusting the wheelie bar just a little bit more and also shifting the weight balance a little further forward than it already was. And that got us this. And as you can see, the car was a lot calmer, and it also got us into the fives for the first time with a 5.840. And then I was like, okay, so we're definitely getting somewhere. Let me go back in and mess with the gearing a little bit. Now, this is kind of where it gets a tad boring, because there's not a lot of action going on. There's not a lot of stuff to look at, but you're literally just making tiny little hairline adjustments. And you just have to make hairline adjustment after hairline adjustment after hairline adjustment until you're somewhat happy with the car. And then after that one, I said to myself, okay, we should probably go ahead and go online now. Even if it's not going to be the fastest thing in the world, I want to get a baseline of how it does in an actual race. Because if y'all weren't aware of this, the cars perform and hook up just a tiny bit differently in test and tune than they do in multiplayer races. So the baseline that you achieve in your test and tune sessions will not be exactly the same as the baselines that you achieve in online multiplayer races. So if you're trying to set up a car yourself, even if you go online and lose a few races, it's worth it to get a different baseline for the same car. And so you can imagine how surprised I was when I jumped into this session and I expected to run maybe a 6.0, maybe a 5.9, but I certainly didn't expect to run this. And that was when I said, okay, so maybe this car has some untapped potential left in it. And that was when I decided to go looking for a few more races and kind of started to think a little bit more seriously about really refining this tune. And then after that race, this car just, well, when I got the launch right, which was a little finicky, it just kept running 5.7 and 5.7 again and 5.7 again and 5.7 again. And I was thinking to myself, okay, so either this is a really consistent 5.7 car, or I don't know, maybe it's got even more in it. And of course, we're going to find that out, because since this is a personal tune of mine, I would definitely like to continue to evolve it as time goes on. But if y'all enjoyed this look at my first initial build of the Mark III Supra, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and I will see y'all next time.